INTJs. 12 rules for life. These rules are a combination of advice that I would give INTJs, but also things that you can learn from them, i.e., rules that INTJs would benefit from, but also ones they would advocate. So it's a mixture of both. Number 1. Trust your own experience of your type. This is a comical one to start off with. As people entering the personality type community will quickly find out, some types seem to be disproportionately common, whereas in reality, lots of those people might be wrong about their type. This very much applies to INTJs. As a result, you'll encounter the issue of loads of people saying that they are INTJs, yet you don't relate to them whatsoever. So, as INTJs, it's important to trust your own experience of your type and not be overly swayed by the sheer amount of other people who are seemingly the same type as you. Number 2. Be energy efficient. This is something that INTJs do naturally and can teach others, but is also something that they need to be mindful of remembering as well. They're a type who adore efficiency. Even if they don't always conceptualize it this way in their minds, that's often what they're doing. Min-maxing, getting the most bang for their buck, multiplying the effectiveness of action by figuring out the precise order of actions that yield the best output and results. It's thinking about life strategically, then acting upon those thoughts. Expending energy haphazardly and randomly is wasteful to them, and never a preference. They see it as borderline reckless at times. I think that other types could learn a lot from the INTJ allegiance to efficiency and effectiveness. Energy seems to be treated as a second-class resource in life when compared to time, but INTJs seem to intuitively understand the folly of this. When INTJs see people waste their energy on pointless things, then complain about not getting enough done, it drives them a bit nuts. Number 3. Be intentional with people. This is related to the last point. It's like a subcategory of efficiency. I've described INTJs as intentional and directional people who don't proceed without some kind of purpose or rationale. Given that INTJs are very easily drained and diminished by social interaction, it makes sense for them to be as intentional as possible when it comes to people. This might sound a bit on the cold side, and maybe it is. Then again, you are INTJs, so you're not going to complain about this. Frivolous friendships and redundant relationships have very little place in the life of an INTJ. High levels of social investment should yield very worthwhile results. Otherwise, it's a recipe for all sorts of unpleasant predicaments. So INTJs should be intentional with people and relationships, even if it runs the risk of looking a bit cold and overly pragmatic at times. Number 4. Ground patterns in data. A common misconception is that each type is good at their dominant function and can use it well. Just because NI-DOMs are good at connecting the dots and spotting patterns doesn't mean that those dots ought to be connected, or that those patterns are actually real. So, as I once read somewhere, nothing about INTJs says you'll be any good at whichever patterns you connect, only that you do it often. In order to be confident that your ideas, theories, and perceived patterns actually line up with and are a reflection of reality, they must be grounded in and cross-referenced with data. INTJs can make leaps of intuition that other types can't, but on their own, these leaps count for nothing. They must be checked and confirmed. Treat them not as likelihoods, but instead as hypotheses, to be dropped the moment they fall apart. You might think, isn't this obvious? Well, for many people and types, they don't think about the world this way. They aren't naturally looking for patterns, trends, trying to read between the lines, see the bigger picture, or make these connections between things. As a result, they also don't need to worry about making mistakes in this area. When you are predisposed to being incredibly pattern-seeking, as INTJs are, confirmation bias is the most important thing to avoid. Intuitive types can become overly attached to their ideas. Don't make this mistake. Number 5. Gain independence through service. Or, in other words, make yourself useful to others. INTJs desire independence to an extreme degree, both in their thinking, but also, if possible, as a lifestyle choice as well. However, that is difficult to achieve, given the nature of many workplaces. One of the reasons I think that the archetypical role of advisor, or power behind the throne, suits INTJs is because it bridges that gap between needing to be involved with people in working relationships, whilst also retaining your independence in many ways. Also, you get to outsource lots of the action to the person you're advising. They can take care of the optics and the front-facing aspects of the job. So, in a nutshell, make others successful and you will be needed. People will be dependent on you. Number 6. Everything is a lesson. INTJs, much like ENTPs, are able to channel a remarkably detached perspective on everything, including unpleasant situations and also on themselves. This is one of the traits that make them exceptional at self-reflection and self-criticism. It's also probably why they get surprised when other people are offended by their criticism, because they themselves wouldn't be offended if they were on the receiving end of it. I think it's a good move for INTJs to double down on this trait. In situations where others might be off-put, offended, shocked, or even horrified by an event that has transpired, to the point where they don't want to stare it in the face, that's all the more reason to lean in and start analysing, dissecting, and understanding. Similarly, when making a mistake themselves, INTJs should direct that detached, dispassionate, and objective analytical mind at themselves and their own actions in order to learn from their mistakes. For some people, and some types, it's better to quickly move on and get back into the flow of action. But for INTJs, they can actually deep dive into their own errors and mine those lessons out of them. Number 7. Leap first. Sometimes. This is advice that is useful for lots of different types. However, it might be the most useful for INTJs. In life, we find ourselves in situations where we're given certain parameters to play within, but we often forget just how randomly we ended up in these situations to begin with. When we trace the thread back in time that led us to our present reality, it's far from linear. If we don't question this, our life circumstances remain arbitrary. So for INTJs, this presents a big danger. They might spend a great deal of time planning, preparing, scheming, and strategizing towards something, but in reality, a much bigger change is needed. In fact, they might need to shake things up completely. The reason serial planners don't leap into things is because they think it completely negates their main strength. But that's not quite true. If you were to throw an INTJ into an extremely chaotic situation, they would actually be one of the best types to deal with that. That's because they would start to take control of the chaos. So INTJs essentially need to do this to themselves. They need to throw themselves into situations that are chaotic or uncertain or uncomfortable, and then naturally, they will start to make the most of it. Because INTJs are optimizers, they can sometimes get stuck at local maximums. You might be completely maximizing your life in the current circumstances, but if you were to shake things up and take a leap, then there would be much greater potential. In some ways, this is trying to push back against the tunnel vision that NI can sometimes fall into. So it's about taking an NE approach to things, sometimes, then bringing the NI back in after you've done that. Number 8. Style is the gateway to substance. FI users can sometimes see FE users as being fake, insincere, and disingenuous. INTJs are a type who greatly value FI and also very much devalue FE. As a result, INTJs are one of the types most averse to social niceties, appearances, and playing the game of personal optics. This is one of the many traits that make INTJs quite difficult to understand and even somewhat paradoxical. On the one hand, they have the reputation of being evil masterminds, more than happy to engage in cold-hearted calculating and unscrupulous scheming. But then, they dislike being superficial and playing politics, even when it benefits them. They are people who very much want to be authentic. This desire for authenticity is a massively underrated feature of them. Sometimes in life, looking the part is important, because perception is important. What good is having expertise, competence, and substance if other people don't like the way you come across, the way you communicate, or the way you present yourself? These things shouldn't get in the way, but they do. Number 9. Avoid isolation at all costs. It's better to be surrounded by opinions you dislike or find stupid, or people that you dislike or find stupid for that matter, than to be isolated. Given that INTJs can fall into being misanthropic, this is definitely a risk. This point actually counteracts many of the dangers INTJs might encounter, such as losing touch with the mainstream, delaying taking action, falling into echo chambers or ivory towers, letting social skills atrophy, taking everything on themselves, and neglecting collaborative relationships. Just to clarify this point, forcing yourself to be around people is not necessarily going to be enjoyable all the time, but it's important. It's not about being a social butterfly, it's about staying in contact with the humans. They can be useful sometimes. Number 10. There are no stupid people. Whoever just flashed through your mind as a counterexample to this point, yeah, they are probably stupid. But in most cases, probably not. People act in ways that make sense to them, even if they don't make sense objectively. When you encounter a person who is, in your assessment, approaching a situation in an illogical, irrational, or ineffective way, it can be useful to pause and ask yourself, precisely why are they acting this way? Is there some other need that is being served for them? Is there another angle or perspective that would be insightful or illuminating? There are two benefits to thinking this way. The first is simply that you might find out something useful and worthwhile. Maybe there is some wisdom in a person's weirdness, method in their apparent madness. The second is that understanding the person better and empathizing more deeply with them will make it much easier to change their mind if you need to. Rather than dismissing people as stupid, which, yes, sometimes INTJs do, giving people some kind of benefit of the doubt will serve you better long term. Number 11. Avoid sensory indulgence and rage. INTJs have SE as their inferior function, and it seems like this leads to a few different things. One is them having a lot of anger or rage that can bubble up in certain situations, almost like that SE force is lying dormant most of the time, but can be triggered into Hulk mode. The other is overindulging in the sensory aspects of life, the most obvious example being food. Because each type is imbalanced when it comes to their inferior function, sometimes it comes out in an unhealthy way. Both of these things, for example, seem to come about usually as the result of stress, so it's good to be aware of these dangers. Number 12. Prioritize experience over achievement. Sometimes. For INTJs, often their work or their hobbies and projects take precedence over all else. As a result, they achieve a lot, or learn a lot, depending on what they're focusing on. However, this comes at the expense of experience in things. Yes, technically everything is an experience, that's true, but I'm talking about instances in which the experience is the primary focus. Things like going on holiday or vacation, depending on what part of the world you're from. So INTJs can end up in situations where they've actually achieved a lot in their life, but they might not have experienced that much, or explored much of life in certain areas. When we think of our best stories from our lives, typically they are times that were, for want of a better phrase, adventures. Times where we are embracing life. If you're an INTJ who's in the workaholic mold, which is certainly a common thing for INTJs, this is going to be even more difficult. Anytime you're focusing on experiences, you're going to feel that pull of wanting to be working. Or worse, feeling like the break you're taking is simply just piling up the amount of tasks that you'll need to do when you come back. But for INTJs, investing in experiences, or adventures, so to speak, is going to pay off, even if it might not feel like it at the time. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Also check out all of the links below, including the Love Who Discord server, which I would highly recommend joining.